to the Culture Chat hosted by WorkXO. Our mission is to upgrade work. Find out more about our Workplace Genome Project at workxo.com. And now, over to our host for today. So hello everyone, this is Maddie Grant, founding partner at WorkXO, and you are listening to us at another edition of the Culture Chat podcast. And I'm very excited today. I have a special guest, Alex Astley. I'm going to ask Alex to introduce himself and give a bit more context, but we have had a couple of podcast conversations about millennials. So this time we are going full circle and we're talking about boomers. But what I want to do before we get into it is, Alex, give us a little bit about you, your company, your background.
Sure. Well, first of all, Maddie, thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here also. I lead a firm called AFS 401k Retirement Services. We are a retirement consulting firm based here in the DC metro area, and we focus on helping companies create forward-thinking and worthwhile retirement benefits for their employees, and then we help their employees take advantage of those programs and the other benefits that are offered within the organization so they can get on track and make wise financial decisions for their life and hopefully be able to enjoy their life from the first and earliest days of their working career all the way into their retirement. And so in the nature of the work we do, we spend a lot of time with working Americans and helping them in their pursuit to financial freedom. And that certainly includes baby boomers.
Yeah, that's great. So yeah, it's actually very exciting to me to be able to dig into the kind of boomer side of the equation a little bit, because there's so much focus on millennials and the incoming generation to the workplace. I mean, I personally have written a book about this called When Millennials Take Over, and of course, they don't actually take over. That was just a title, to get old people to be scared into buying the book, But so millennials are just the thing that the generation that everybody focuses on, but we are very well aware that there are three generations at least in the workplace at the same time. And so, our big question for this conversation was around the idea that baby boomers are working longer and they're sticking around the workplace more. And, so we want to talk about what impact they have on today's workplace. Do you have some thoughts to kick that off?
Absolutely. I think there are a lot of impacts, and I'm excited and going into a number of different directions around this. I think the first one is how employers handle and manage the role of multiple generations in the workplace and all of the different characteristics and personalities and components that make up these different demographic groups, these different generations, whether it's broadly as we tend to think about them in a stereotypical way, or even uniquely among some of the challenges and goals that the different generations who are in the workplace today have and want to accomplish. And, baby boomers, no different than probably how the conversation tends to go with millennials today. Baby boomers really changed the workforce a long time ago. And this was really the first generation in which a significant portion of the female population of that generation went into the workforce where previous generations weren't. That wasn't as common. And so now, and they were also the largest demographic cohort up until the millennial generation starts to enter the workforce. So the sort of this period we're in right now is one where we have around 10,000 workers, 10,000 baby boomers who are entering retirement each day in 2017. But there are still millions, many millions who are working into age 65 and beyond. And so as an employer, as an organization, that's a significant population that you're tasked to create a culture and create an environment for, while still trying to cultivate that same, or still try to cultivate the same, I guess, engagement and excitement from your employees that are coming from the different demographic groups. And so, that's an area that I think is really interesting in how companies build their work environment, their benefits, their compensation structure in order to meet the needs of the varying demographic groups, in particular the baby boomer population that for the most part is continuing to work beyond age 65 or age 67.
Yeah, so I have a couple of questions related to that. The first one is really around change. So you've been working with baby boomers, and as they transition out of the workplace, for a while, and I'm curious as to whether you've seen a difference just in the last few years, in terms of how culture, if at all, has changed to kind of accommodate this mixing of generations.
I think for a number of industries and a number of companies, their cultures are changing to best accommodate the different employees they have and the different generations they have. One of the trends that you see that benefits, I think, a lot of both the millennial generation and the baby boomers is that as baby boomers enter into retirement age but still want to or need to work, you are seeing more companies creating flexible working arrangements, where there's this idea of semi-retirement. And so when on this big question that we're kind of getting into and tackling today, I think of at least three areas. And one is how employers accommodate the baby boomer demographic as they're entering into retirement age, but not yet ready to or wanting to leave the workplace. And one is for that number of employees who want to continue working, but instead of working full time, want to go to some sort of flexible arrangement, or maybe they're working 35 hours a week or 30 hours a week, and eventually cutting down to part-time. The other part is just managing baby boomers and their personalities compared to Gen X and millennials. And there's a really great, I guess, anecdotal presentation I saw that I tend to cite a lot by MIT Age Lab, who does a ton of studies around the aging workforce.
Oh, nice.
And the idea was something like this. Inside the workforce, when a team or a manager uses the phrase, "We need to complete this project immediately," what does that mean to different to the different
Yes.
people working on that project? Yeah, for the baby boomers, the idea, and again, this is kind of, I'll paraphrase this because I don't have the exact words that they use, but for the baby boomers, it was something along the lines of all hands on deck. I got to get to this. I'm not working on anything else until my part of this project or this project is completed. For Gen X, it was something like, okay, we should schedule a meeting and discuss this and determine who's going to complete what sections and identify an outline and a timeline for how we're going to complete it. And then for the millennial group, it was, let's send around some emails and create a workflow on Slack and have some ideas on strategies on if this really is a critical part of the business. So it was like three totally different ideas. And so as employers, just being able to manage those different personalities becomes really challenging.
Right. Well, and what I love about that example is that the initial question is the same for everybody, right? But the way they think about that question is obviously completely different.
Right. And so that's the one part of, like, how do you accommodate the various personalities and demographic groups from a working arrangement, how they want to work, and their management style. Another obvious one that you may have touched on in previous podcasts, but you hear about a lot is, the difference in working from 9 to 5, the traditional 9 to 5, or working around the clock. And the younger generation tends to fall in this category where if you email, a millennial any reasonable hour throughout the day, they're going to get that email and respond relatively quickly, right? They might not complete the request of the email, but they will acknowledge that they received it, whether it's at 7 in the morning or 11:30 at night or 2 in the morning. And they don't view sort of their work schedule as I need to be in at 9 and I'm going to work straight through until 5 or 6. It's really this fluid process of working and taking care of the other responsibilities and enjoying life on various hours as long as they're getting their work done. You know, historically, the baby boomer mentality is I'm coming in at 8 or 8:30 and I'm here until 5. And if you email me after 5, I'm not going to check it until the next morning.
Yeah.
So those are just some of the challenges with accommodating the management style, the working arrangements. The other one that we've heard a lot about, and you've seen some research studies on, is if there's this brain trust that baby boomers possess, that they have these vast technical skills, knowledge, and industry-specific abilities that have not yet been transferred to the younger generations, and therefore may leave companies in a detrimental situation if you see a large swath of that population transition into retirement.
Yeah, are you
And you
seeing
see this
like more?
Sorry, go ahead.
I mean, are you involved in sort of deeper conversations about that transfer of knowledge as they think about retirement? That must be something that comes up a lot, right?
Right. Yeah, I think it's more and more apparent in certain industries over others. For example, I would say the highly technical professional service industries like engineering and accounting, there are a number of senior level members of teams and companies and revenue producing employees that make up the baby boomer population. And it's a little bit of a catch-22 because the next thing I'm going to get into is the ability for younger workers to advance their careers. But it's a little bit of a catch-22 where these baby boomers have been such a dominant force within that company's success that it has not created the opportunity for upward mobility of younger employees because they've stuck around or they've enjoyed sticking around. And so now the question is whether they possess really the skill set that has created a lot of value for that company, especially in these, what I'll call the top end of the small market into the mid-market companies or organizations that have maybe a few hundred to a few thousand employees. That mid space of, let's call it 300 to 5,000 or 7,000 employees. You see that quite a bit. And in certain industries, it's not as relevant. You could say in the tech space, in particular, is one where generally they don't have that problem in their workforce. That's usually a much younger younger average age in much of the tech design, computer development space. But in some of these other areas, I think it's certainly a concern and a challenge for companies on how they can recruit and create a workplace that allows their younger employees to grow professionally and personally and feel engaged and loyal to that company and patient enough to be able to move up in the company while they're waiting for the more seasoned, experienced baby boomers to transition into retirement or semi-retirement.
Yeah, and I've been thinking this is an interesting sort of corollary to associations. So we do a lot of work with associations, and in particular, we've worked with several nursing associations. And I remember having a conversation about the idea that a nurse is generally feels like she's a nurse as part of her identity. And so at different life stages, she's still a nurse, but she's obviously doing different things. And so we were talking about engagement with the organization and things like that. But very specifically, when these nurses start to retire, they stay connected to their hospitals as volunteers. So it's so much part of their identity that they want to actually continue even if they're not paid, which is, kind of amazing. And maybe nursing is a very particular kind of field in that respect, but that does seem to be very much a kind of cultural sort of idea that you could, as a baby boomer, you could stay connected to the place where you've worked for a while. Of course, assuming that you've been somewhere long enough to want to,
Right.
but to stay connected and to be a mentor and to be able to more actively perhaps transfer some of your knowledge through to the younger people coming in, and that seems to be individual desire based, not so much structures that are necessarily supported by companies or
Mm-hmm.
that even exist to do that. But it could be interesting to think about whether there are ways to do that much more actively as part of your culture, as a company.
Right. And I think one of the untapped areas of value that many companies and organizations have is the experience, the historical knowledge, and just the mentorship available with their tenured employees, with their baby boomer employees that commonly aren't getting transferred to other workers. And some of that's from a technical perspective.
Yeah.
But I think a big part of it is much more qualitative,
Mm-hmm.
soft skills of the population of baby boomers within these organizations being able to share all of those experiences and strategies and ideas of how they've endured through a career in an organization and overcome challenges and been part of change to the younger generations. And there's probably a lot of corporate value there, as well as ability to create engagement among the workforce, and as you are mentioning, Maddie, really create that mechanism for the baby boomers to feel fulfilled towards the end of their career.
Yeah, I mean, I think this whole mentoring topic is really, really interesting, and I think there's definitely a perception that that millennials don't really care about mentoring, but I don't think that's actually true in the real world at all. It just may be the vehicle might be different. So maybe instead of a millennial being mentoring or being mentored by an individual mentor, a kind of one-to-one relationship, we've seen evidence that millennials like to be mentored more in a group situation. But there's definitely scope for thinking about lots of different ways to build those relationships in between the generations.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, all that qualitative stuff, I think there's gaps there that could be super useful. I mean, you mentioned early in the conversation that baby boomers had the largest female population in the workplace. Well, in corporations, there's not a lot of information about how to sort of move up in the world as a woman, right? And I could see that just as one of many topics, but that being, really critical. And of course, there are mentoring groups. Like, I know these things exist, but it just seems to be an interesting kind of cultural theme to highlight as something that could help both ends of the spectrum, basically.
Well, and not to transition or go on a tangent too far off this, but I would, from just a workforce culture perspective, I think the organizations and the companies that are really focused around that today and perhaps have been over the last, let's call it 5 or even 10 years, the first movers of this generation of companies really redefining and revisiting their mission, vision, and values and how that aligns with all the things that they do in their corporation or their organization are the ones that I think are making big strides in creating better long-term employees and better employee engagement. I mean, we still work with organizations where, you go in and you meet with some of their employees and they've been there for 20, 25, 30, 35 years. But there's a wow that comes with that, because the majority of organizations and companies around the country, are working with an employee base that has a timeline somewhere between, I would say reasonably 2 and 10 years. There's a lot of data that says the average millennial is, transitioning from one job or one position to the next within a, 2 to 3 year time frame based on the study that you look at.
Yeah.
And so companies are tasked with this challenge of like, how do we keep our best employees here? And I think it gets to a little bit what we're talking about. We started off talking about that specifically with the baby boomer population. Now, and you kind of transition within the female population, and I think it's just a overall building an identity of rebuilding the identity and the culture of the company is becoming, I think, a differentiator for forward-thinking companies and organizations. They have to revisit and rethink about all these things. And from our lens as retirement plan consultants, a big component of that is aligning your benefit structure, aligning the retirement benefits and the financial benefits that you're offering to your employees in a way that matches the culture of your organization,
right?
The way that matches the mission and the vision of the organization, not just following, industry trends or best practices, but really customizing it to what your employees are asking for. And so that's what we think about in working as consultants to companies. And then that creates this whole other conversation around the different generations and how baby boomers who continue to work are having an impact on the workplace and what it means to companies as a whole.
Yeah, so it looks like we're almost out of time. So, but I love that, and I would love it if we could end with an example of how a company might have shifted or honed in on their culture in that way. Do you have an example?
So, sure. Let me give you 2 very quick ideas around that. One of the things that we're thinking about and really measuring from a quantitative perspective is if there is a cost and or a liability to the employer for their workers or their baby boomers who want to retire but can't. Because, we talked through our time together about baby boomers who continue working, and there's a segment of those baby boomers who continue working because they enjoy it. They love what they do. It's their identity. Yeah. But there's a big population, and it's probably the majority, at least Gallup polls say that the majority of baby boomers still want to retire at 65 or 67, and it's simply unattainable for them to do so. So what kind of real impact does that have on the company today and over the course of the next 3, 5, 10 years and how does it affect their business from a cost perspective, from a human capital perspective? We're measuring that with our clients and then developing strategies so that they can help their baby boomers who want to retire get in a position to retire by creating various programs and benefits. Some are financial related, some are things like financial planning and financial wellness geared towards that demographic, and then others are more focused around lifestyle expectations of what baby boomers want from their future. Yeah. Because there's another group that they would retire, but they just don't know what they're going to do because they've worked. And so we're starting to see companies incorporate all of those things. First of all, identifying, are there risks within their population, risks that could impact the company in different ways, and then delivering benefits, delivering programs to work to try to address those. And those benefits can be some of the traditional things when you think about a 401k or financial wellness programs. They can be more non-traditional, of helping somebody transition into semi-retirement and then showing them other ways they can be involved in the community or through associations that are supplemental or complementary to their company that still allows them to stay involved.
Yeah, actually, I have to mention, I was just talking to a friend of mine today about this podcast, and he said that he's seen evidence of some boomers basically starting a whole new career after they retire, which basically goes from a white collar job to a blue collar job. So they still want to work, they still want to be active, they still want to learn, they still want to do stuff, they still want to be connected to people. They don't want to sit behind a desk anymore. It's like
That's right. Yeah.
tour of duty. They're ready to try something new. So that's sort of exactly what you're saying, is if there's a way to move into a completely different kind of work, but that's somehow connected to the original company in the way that they, help the community, or, whatever the cause or reason might be. But I really like that idea. I hadn't thought about that before.
Yeah, right. And so companies are working to give their employees the roadmap to do that, right? And just like many companies have built the roadmap on how somebody advances through their career within the company. And now it's that roadmap on how they can advance and move into retirement, which allows the company to then promote and build the future for the younger workers, for the millennials. And I know that's what the millennials are looking for. Right.
And so I just want to end by saying I think that's so much a culture thing, right? Is to be able to say to the people that work for you as a company that you pay attention to their needs at every life cycle stage. And even if they leave and maybe come back or maybe don't come back, but either way, that attention to what's going on in people's lives through the whole cycle is really critical to your culture. I think that's an important thing that a company could focus on as part of their culture identity. So anyway,
yeah, absolutely.
We are just about out of time. So thank you, Alex, again for spending some time with me today to talk about this. This was a really good conversation, and I'm sure there'll be lots more to talk about.
My pleasure. Thanks, Maddie. Have a great day, and I'll talk to you soon.
And that was the Culture Chat today. We'll have some highlights up on the blog soon. Find out more about WorkXO and how to map your workplace genome at workxo.com.